Tonight, everybody, the president also saying there's not going to be a ceasefire in Iran. Full stop. Listen to this.
We can have dialogue, but I don't want to do a ceasefire. You know, you don't do a ceasefire when you're literally obliterating the other side.
So that is after we reported just 24 hours ago that thousands more U.S. Marines are heading to the region. You see the USS Boxer there deploying from San Diego, both sides hammering each other on the Persian New Year. Take a look at this moment that an Iranian missile fragment exploded in Jerusalem's Old City. Iran's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, issuing a written statement to mark the holiday, praising the resolve of Iran's citizens and emphasizing, quote, good relations with neighboring countries. But Iran continues to strike those neighbors. The regime is again targeting oil and gas facilities across the Gulf, like this one in Kuwait. American warplanes firing on the Strait of Hormuz to try and reopen the flow of oil in the crucial waterway. And the president lashing out at allies for not getting involved, calling NATO a, quote, paper tiger without the U.S. and saying the fight in Iran is, quote, militarily won. We have got team coverage on this thing. We got Keir Simmons, who's in the region for us, reporting from Riyadh. But first, I want to go to Courtney QB, who is talking to us about where the military stands on all these things. Courtney, let's get into it, because we know right now, when it comes to deployments, right, troops heading towards the region, we know that is happening. But what are the president's plans when it comes to the deployment of those actual troops on the ground?
Yeah, so what we know is that these additional Marines are going. They were supposed to deploy anyway, but now they're being sent to the Middle East, and their deployment time is being accelerated, according to officials who are familiar with the planning. Yasmin, why this is so critical is because this is a Marine Expeditionary Unit. Now, they are about 2,200 to 2,500 Marines, but about 800 to 1,000 of them are infantry, and they are very highly trained, specially trained for things like amphibious landings. So they have you can see actually that's the USS Boxer on screen right there. That's where they will be deploying on. It's the 11th MEU, the USS Boxer is the amphibious ready group that they're heading out from San Diego. So, but they have this special capability for amphibious landings, and why that's so important is because some of the potential places where U.S. troops could land include islands. We've been talking a lot about Karg Island, includes securing some of the ports. We've been talking about that because some of the most critical threats to shipping in there could be mitigated by a U.S. troop presence in some of those places. So the threats include things like anti-ship missiles. We've already seen them employing those. Mines, drones, and then, of course, there's the Mosquito fleet. We don't talk a whole lot about that, but these are these small, fast boats. Some of them are unmanned, and they're just packed with explosives, and they present a real threat to commercial shipping because they can send a swarm of them out to surround a tanker or a big ship as it gets into that critical point of the choke point, surrounding it and attacking it if they desire to do so. Yes, it's a real threat to any kind of shipping in that region.
I want to talk about the potential of reopening the Strait of Hormuz. I want to play for you first, though, what the president had to say about that just in the last hour or so.
NATO could help us, but they so far haven't had the courage to do so. And others could help us. But, you know, we don't use it. You know, at a certain point, it'll open itself.
What's he getting at there?
Okay, so here's what we can report about what the president is weighing. There are a number of different options for U.S. troops on the ground, and there's one that is specific to the Strait of Hormuz. There's this set of islands in the Persian Gulf. It's right before you get to where the Strait of Hormuz. You can see there on the screen here. So right before you get to the Strait of Hormuz, there's a set of small islands. One is known as Abu Musa. The others are the Greater and Lesser Toom Islands. Now, you may not think, you know, why would those be so potentially strategic? The depth of the Gulf around those islands makes it so that some of the larger ships have to go through them before they can get into the Strait of Hormuz. Well, Iran has placed spotters and a tremendous amount of military equipment on those islands. If the U.S. were to take those islands, they would cut off their ability for those spotters to then alert the Mosquito fleet that we were just talking about to then come and swarm those ships. They would also could take out the military capability on those islands. So they are very strategic. But you can also see at the top of the screen, at the top of that map, there's a couple of ports, including one known as Bandar Abbas. That's where some of these small boats come from. If the U.S. were to take those islands and to secure some of those ports, they could cut down on one of the most serious threats that exist to the Strait of Hormuz. That's one way that the U.S. could employ troops on the ground in Iran to really be able to open up that Strait of Hormuz, yes.
Court, I know this is just breaking news. A lot of reporting that you, along with the rest of your team, have been doing about the potential of ground troops inside of Iran and what the president is weighing. And you laid out one possible scenario in which the president could feasibly activate. What else are we talking about here? And are we looking at any potential scenarios of what we saw a deployment, for instance, in Iraq and Afghanistan? Or is this more of a small deployment?
So the officials who we spoke with said that the options that are under serious consideration are much more tailored than the large 100,000 plus that we saw for Iraq and Afghanistan. That in fact we are still talking about potentially thousands of troops. So in addition to the options under consideration for reopening the Strait of Hormuz, there's one for the U.S. securing the oil, Iran's oil, Karg Island, which we've been talking a lot about. The U.S. could send potentially hundreds of troops to Karg Island to take it, to secure it, and then ultimately use it as leverage. And then, of course, there's always the most dangerous and the biggest option of all, sending troops in to secure and retrieve the highly enriched uranium that's buried deep underground.
Courtney Kube, as always, great reporting on this. Thank you for bringing it to us and breaking it on this show. I want to bring in Keir Simmons, who's on the ground for us in Riyadh. Keir, I first want you to react to what we're hearing from Courtney. This literally just dropped in the last couple of minutes or so. Obviously, excellent reporting from the team in Washington, D.C., Courtney, along with others there, and talking about potential scenarios in which the president and his team are weighing for ground troops in or around Iran. What do you make of it and the potential escalation it could cause?
Well, I thought it was fascinating to hear what Courtney was laying out there, a really detailed look at what kinds of strategy the U.S. may employ in order to try to escalate and gain control of that escalating field, the Strait of Hormuz, which is so crucial now. Now, I mean, I think with Karg Island, what Courtney was referring to there, what she was talking about, is that because that is the means through which Iran is able to export its oil, it has its oil infrastructure there. If you take control of that, and it's an island, so it has there are ways in which that might be tactically possible for a limited number of Marines, that you would be able to therefore say to Iran, we've got control now of your oil exports, you need to negotiate. And then in terms of those other islands that Courtney was talking about, which, by the way, are disputed in the Gulf, those islands too would give Marines the opportunity to not be on the mainland of Iran, which, as you can imagine, presents a higher risk, but to still try to gain control of the strait. On the other hand, and here's where it gets tricky, so far Iran and the Iranian regime's leadership has not buckled. It has not compromised when President Trump has put pressure on the regime, and even despite all of this bombing, and even despite so many members of the leadership being killed. So that's the question. Even if the US was capable of doing that, and was able to do that, would that still lead to a situation where the Iranian regime was doubling down and trying to return fire, and maybe even taking a kind of guerrilla warfare approach, using the fact that US boots on the ground, even if it was on islands, were present in the region to target US servicemen and women? I mean, these are the kinds of questions that they'll be thinking about in the Trump administration.
Keir, do you have any reporting to suggest that the Iranians are preparing for a potential ground invasion into Karg Island? They understand the asset that Karg Island provides them and the potential that the administration is already weighing this option.
We can't know. What we can know is that I think it's clear at this stage the Iranians have been preparing for potential scenarios for years. That's clear from the way that they have operated. And what we've been told by Iranian former IAGC commanders, for example, one who is still close to the regime, what we've been told, and it's been said also by the Iranian leadership, that there are units of the IRGC that are operating based on a strategy that they were given. They don't need direct control. So certainly the Iranians, of course, are aware of these possibilities, of the way that the US might work. After all, it's their terrain, it's their terrain, if you like. They know it so well. We're thinking about all the things that the US and Israel might do. But really one of the crucial questions is how much leadership is there, and to what extent is the Iranian regime and its military and the IRGC able to think and change strategy?
Keir Simmons, thank you.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.